What comes to your mind when I say that you should think about an epic adventure in a fantasy-based world? I bet that you may think of something like The Lord of the Rings, or tales that include fighting dragons and all kinds of monsters such as goblins and orcs. Or maybe you're already thinking about Dungeons and Dragons, where you venture out with your friends and complete a variety of quests inside a world that's based on high fantasy. And if you combine that with an interesting story, good characters and the charming style of 90s anime, then something can be created that will be enjoyed by people even after centuries of its official release. So let me tell you about the fantasy anime Record of Lodoss War and why it truly is a timeless masterpiece. Record of Lodoss War is an anime that just recently came into my life and since then has absolutely made me fall in love with it. While watching its first episode, I was immediately captured by its visual and sound design, which reminds you of the golden era of anime. A bit further into the first episode, I couldn't help but to associate it with Dungeons and Dragons just because I am playing it with a couple of my friends once every week, and as it takes place in a rather typical high fantasy setting with a group of companions which vary in classes and races. I googled its origins and found out that the anime is actually based on the author's Dungeons and Dragons transcripts, which he later published as high fantasy novels. These were then adapted into manga and later to the anime, which is an adaptation of the first novel The Grey Witch. I also found out that the OVA does not follow the complete storyline of the novels, because they weren't finished at the time that the OVA was made, but that didn't really make me care because I wanted to primarily experience the OVA as it is. With that said, I will only talk about the OVA and why I think that it definitely stood up to the test of time, and with the little look back on the origin of the franchise now out of the way, we can get to the main point of discussion, the OVA. In the opening we are introduced to the creation of an island named Lodoss, which was created in the aftermath of a war between gods thousands of years ago. The last two remaining gods of this war, Martha, the Earth Mother, and Cardis, Goddess of Destruction, had one final showdown. This resulted into a piece of the mainland being cut off and forming the island which would over time be known as the Cursed Island Lodoss. This island has been shaped by centuries of countless wars, and now in the present yet another conflict is about to erupt. Just about the time, in old D&D fashion, a group of adventurers cross their paths. Originally driven by their own goals and desires, they eventually pursue to fight to defend the peace of Lodoss. On their journey, they encounter everything you would imagine from a typical D&D campaign: dungeons, monsters, dragons, elves, dwarves, magic, knights, and boss encounters. The main protagonist of the story is a young swordsman named Pan, who is living in the tarnished shadow of his deceased father's legacy and has the ambitions to become a hero. Pan is depicted as a brave and righteous character who often fights more with his heart than with his head. Because of his chivalry, he also tends to pick fights against opponents which outweigh his fighting skills. The second character that we are introduced to is Ato, a priest who lived in the same village as Pan and is his long childhood friend. He is a valuable member of the group as he can provide first aid with his healing magic. He is a very caring character and is often worrying about Pan and the others. Up next to join the group is Dietlit, an elf who, besides her massive shoulder pads, is not only beautiful but also intelligent and a useful companion in many situations. She has the intuition to manage any possible threats to the group and a powerful connection to nature, which allows her to summon elemental spirits, which aid her and the party. She first met Pan near his home village as he tries to protect her from some monsters, even though unnecessarily, because she's a well-skilled fighter as well. Charmed by his kind heart and act of chivalry, she takes a liking to Pan and joins him on his quest. Next is Gim, a dwarf who is an old and experienced warrior. Gim begins his story venturing out to find a missing young priestess named Lilia and bring her home. He's joined by his old friend Slane, a wise sorcerer who is capable of casting powerful spells that can destroy his enemies and protect his allies. The last one to join is the thief Woodchuck. He's the stereotypical thief in the fantasy genre. He's portrayed as a cocky but somewhat experienced person and adds his comedic charm into the otherwise serious atmosphere of the party. Together they will later meet and support Fawn, King of Valis, and Cashew, King of Flame, in defending the land of an upcoming invasion, which is led by Emperor Belt, ruler of Mamel. Belt is accompanied by the Black Knight Ashram and his Grand Sorcerer, Wagnard. He wishes to conquer the island of Lodoss and to defeat his old friend King Fawn. 30 years ago, Belt and Fawn fought side by side as members of a group called the Six Legendary Heroes. Both are wielding a powerful weapon. Fawn is the wielder of the Holy Sword and Belt is the wielder of the demon sword named Soul Crusher. The former allies are now on a warpath between light and darkness, so, you know, just in typical RPG fashion. However, there is a twist, and behind the scenes, the Grey Witch Carla has been pulling the strings to manipulate the wands in power to serve her own intentions. Emperor Belt is pushing into the land, and provoking an open war with King Fawn is a direct cause of Carla whispering promises of great power and victory into his ear. Record of Lodoss War is a perfect example of not reinventing the wheel, but of perfectly executing something that already exists. It offers everything that you may wish for in a high fantasy anime, and it supports its execution with a phenomenal soundtrack, character design and its general art direction. You can see in the animation that the studio really spent their budget wisely, and some of the close-up shots are till this day some of the most beautiful drawn scenes which capture the spirit of the time perfectly. The animation is minimalist where it needs to be and relies on the art direction to set the mood appropriately when there is not a lot of action to show. Yet when needed, the animation cranks up to provide just the right amount of excitement. Now, the characters may seem to be pretty simple and stereotypical, but they offer just enough complexity to root for them and to enjoy the journey. I personally never felt bored or annoyed by any of the characters and enjoyed every bit of their screen time, as every one of them adds to the big experience and don't feel like tools to fit some type of standards in media. Safe to say is that sometimes less is just a bit more. The villains, on the other hand, offer a bit more depth, and when you look past the shell of being the bad emperor or the righteous king, Belt debates with Fawn about whether there is a difference of one man's purpose of uniting Lodoss under one flag of diplomacy or another man's ambition to conquer it, implying that both are a way of asserting control and consolidating power. Carla is cold and calculating. She's a puppeteer that lurks in the shadows and tries to keep Lodoss in a form of balance. She has seen the horror and devastation that power can unleash over her life, and she dedicated herself to preventing this balance of power to tip into one or the other direction. She kind of believes in that balance like the Force in Star Wars, with the difference that she keeps that balance through starting conflicts. In conclusion, I have to say that I am very glad that I found Record of Lodoss War, as it offers everything that I wished for to see in a high fantasy anime. I normally am the type of guy that does not rewatch series or anime, but I can definitely see myself returning to this one more than once in the future. It's a well executed, perfectly presented example of swords and sorcery high fantasy that takes itself seriously, that charmed me with its magic since the first few seconds. And if you are a fan of the fantasy genre, the chances are that you might get hit by its charming spell and that you end up feeling the same way as I did.
Oh.